the 48th Vice President of the United States, Mike Pence, and his wife, Karen. We're so grateful that they are here today. Mr. Vice President, that's how we welcome heroes in Utah. Thank you. Thank you for being here. I want to recognize, take just a second, as the Executive Director, again, of the Herbert Institute for Public Policy at Utah Valley University. We are grateful to be able to host this event today. We want to recognize one important couple up front who've been very supportive of Utah Valley University and the Herbert Institute. Scott and Karen Keller, who have contributed to making today happen with both their time and resources. We are so grateful for both of you. Thank you. We are also very grateful for Scott Anderson for sponsoring and covering the cost of this lunch and giving us the access to this room with an incredible view. Thank you for him. Thank you. We are ready to begin the program and hope you continue enjoying your lunch. I'd like to welcome Mr. Keller here, who will announce the remainder of the program. Okay.
Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. It's wonderful to see so many friends here, and particularly to be here to support Vice President Mike and Karen Pence. We welcome the Pences here. They are beloved friends. We honor and respect them. We are grateful for his wonderful leadership. He embodies all that we have been taught and believe and want in a future leader in this country, and we're grateful for his leadership thus far and hope that he will continue this path at some point in time in his political career. We are grateful that they are here today, Mr. Vice President and Karen. So we are also privileged to have former Governor Gary Herbert and former First Lady Jeanette Herbert here with us. And the Senate President Stuart Adams and Speaker Brad Wilson. I'm looking out. There are other dignitaries. I don't see Deidre, but she was with us previously, but our current Lieutenant Governor and other dignitaries here. But anyway, it's a real honor to be here with you today and to be taught and giving deep thought and views for the country from someone like our Vice President, former Vice President Mike Pence. We are grateful to have Governor Herbert here with us. Many times I've acknowledged his wonderful leadership of 30 years in the political arena of Utah. And if any of us in the private sector as business men and women think that the infrastructure that our leaders don't pave and create for us to prosper, then we probably are not looking much past our nose. For me, under the leadership of the Herberts, I prospered, and I know that I could not have done that without infrastructure and ease to get into business and to tap into human resource and to take advantage of this beautiful state that we live in and excel in the endeavors that we pursue. So a hand of applause for Governor Herbert and his wife, First Lady. Please join me in welcoming Governor Herbert, who will introduce our VIP speaker here today.
Well, thank you, Scott. Again, let me just take a moment to welcome everybody. We're honored to have you here. All of you are important people, but you care about the future of our country, and that's why you're here. Taking time out of your busy schedule to be here, and so we're honored to have you here. We're honored to have Mike Pence and his good wife Karen with us. I've known Mike for many years. I met him, I heard about him when he was in Congress. He was in Congress for 12 years. And then I met him personally up close and working on some issues as the governor of Indiana. He's known as a man of integrity. They're people of faith. They have good moral fiber and have done some great things in their leadership roles as congressman, as a governor, and now as vice president. So they met in college. He was doing it in law school, and they met there and fell in love, and they've had a wonderful family with 3 children and doing some really wonderful things. Family's at the top of the list in everything he does. Even getting him to come here, we had to schedule around family events he had back in Indiana. Shows he's got his priorities straight. So without further ado, we're going to have an opportunity to have a little conversation with the Vice President here today. We're going to ask him a few questions and see if we can't learn something together about what he thinks the future holds for the United States and his vision for the future. So with that, please welcome the Vice President of the United States, former Vice President Mike Pence. Okay. I see you're fastening your seatbelt here, getting ready for the action. Why don't you give us an opening statement, greeting, and then we'll start grilling you.
Well, first off, thank you for such a wonderful, warm welcome. Karen and I are delighted to be back in Utah. Thank you so much. It's a joy to be here. And I, too, want to thank our great friends, Scott and Karen Keller, for helping to make today possible, as well as everyone else that's made time to be here today. And I will tell you, I was governor of Indiana when Governor Gary Herbert was leading Utah, such a distinction. And I must tell you, I really did not enjoy competing with Governor Gary Herbert for jobs. But we see that you're making, through the Herbert Institute, you're making just as great a difference in the life of the great state of Utah as you did in public life. Join me in thanking Governor Gary Herbert and his incredible wife, Jeanette, for all they've meant to this state and this nation. But I'm really delighted to be with you, and I know this is a challenging time in the life of our nation. But when I think about what we were able to accomplish with the support of the people of Utah over the 4 years of the Trump-Pence administration, I know that with the right leadership at the national level at both ends of Pennsylvania Avenue, with the right leadership in state houses around the country, the best days for the greatest nation on earth are yet to come. We just have to return to right principles in America. I believe it. I mean, when you think in a short period of time during the Trump-Pence administration, we rebuilt our military, we revived our economy by cutting taxes, rolling back regulations, unleashed American energy. We became a net energy exporter for the first time in 75 years. We became energy independent. We reduced illegal immigration at our southern border by 90%. We appointed conservatives who stood up for religious liberty and the sanctity of life to our Supreme Court of the United States of America. And before that pandemic struck, all of our nation, America, prospered. But how times have changed for all of us. I mean, that period before the pandemic of prosperity and security and of peace on the world stage has given way to the leadership under President Joe Biden that has literally weakened America at home and abroad. where there was a disastrous withdrawal from Afghanistan that emboldened the enemies of freedom around the world, whether it be policies at home that unleashed the worst border crisis in history, that a gusher of spending that launched the worst inflation in 40 years, a crime wave in many of our major cities, and a war on energy here in Utah and around the country that's driven up the prices of energy and made us dependent again on some of the most volatile places in the world for our energy needs. But I'm here to tell you, hope is on the way. And I truly do believe we are 18 months away from a great American comeback, and it'll start right here in the great state of Utah. So thank you all very much, and I look forward, Governor, to our conversation.
Well, thank you, Mr. Vice President. We are honored to have you here. As we've already explained, you've had great experience, as 12 years in the Congress, Governor of Indiana, a challenging time for the Vice President, and tell us what you've learned from that experience. What experience can you share with us, and what lessons learned?
Well, it was a great privilege for me to serve. But it would be important for me to acknowledge at the outset that I did not serve alone. I was married now for 37 years to a Marine Corps mom, a 30-year elementary school teacher, an accomplished artist, and the proud grandmother of 3 granddaughters under the age of 2. Would you join me in giving a warm welcome to the greatest second lady the United States of America has ever had, Karen Pence. Well, what we did, as you may be able to grab a copy of my book on your way out. I don't know if I mentioned I wrote a book, Gary.
I don't know if it's common knowledge or not, but we have a few of them around here. By the way, don't rush. On the way out, one book per household. We have one for everybody.
I'd be honored if anyone took a look at the book. It really is less a story about us as it is a story, I believe, about God's faithfulness in our lives and lessons learned along the way. As you would read in the pages of my memoir, we tried our hand at politics, Gary. You may not even know this, when Ronald Reagan was still in the White House. 1988. I was 29 years old, jet black hair, okay, thinner. Karen didn't look any different, to be honest with you. You can see the pictures. But we ran for Congress not once but twice, and frankly, we got caught up in the kind of negative politics that we've gotten used to in America these days. But in the aftermath of that, I was reflecting on my values, the decision I'd made to put my faith in Jesus Christ as a freshman in college, and I came to conclude that I hadn't squared what my faith required of me with my politics. And so 10 years later, when the opportunity came back around, we just determined we were going to run campaigns that honored God, informed the debate, and then we're about winning. And with my wife at my side, we were elected to the Congress in the year 2000. We were elected governor of Indiana 12 years later, and then it was my great honor to be elected the 48th Vice President of the United States. And let me just say to the people of Utah, thank you for your support during that season of service, serving as your
between Democrats and Republicans. When I watch the news, all I see is citizens fighting against citizen. When I watch the news, all I see are two candidates from opposing parties trying to tear each other down. If our leaders can't get along, how are the citizens supposed to get along? Your examples could make all the difference to bring us together. I think many people long for what we thought were the idyllic years of Reagan and Tip O'Neill. They would meet together usually on a weekly basis and say, what can we do today?
Sure.
What will you do? What can you do? What should be done to bring us together and not have so much divisiveness and backbiting?
Well, I remember that quote, and I remember smiling then, and I've smiled again. From the mouths of babes comes wisdom. You know, I've often said to people, I'm a conservative, but I'm not in a bad mood about it. In my memoir, I don't know if I mentioned I wrote a book, but in my memoir, I actually recount how when Karen and I went on this journey to just try and really treat others the way we want to be treated. That's at the very heart of my faith, and I know the faith of so many people in this room. It's love God and love our neighbors. But we tried to do that, and so during my years in Congress, as I write in the book, I developed relationships, good relationships, with people that I agreed with on nothing. I think of the late John Lewis, who was an aide-de-camp. I see an old colleague in the room. John Lewis was an aide-de-camp to the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. He was beaten on Bloody Sunday to within an inch of his life. He was an incredible American. And he was a man of profound faith. And it was on our shared pride in the progress that we've made toward a more perfect union and on our shared faith that we became friends. I thought John Lewis was wrong about everything, except that he was a great man and that this was a great country. And I'll never forget the day that he came into my office and he asked if I would co-lead the annual pilgrimage to the Edmund Pettus Bridge in Selma, Alabama, to mark the anniversary of Bloody Sunday. And I said, I'll do it, but on one condition. And that was that Karen and I could bring our son Michael and daughter Charlotte and daughter Audrey with us. I wanted them to walk that bridge. I wanted them to experience that. I wanted them to know how far in their parents' lifetime America had come toward a more perfect union. Now, John and I would go on to disagree always. I think if you saw Mike Pence's vote on the board in the House of Representatives, you could assume if I was green, he was red. If I was red, he was green. But we had the ability to forge a relationship that was above that. You know, I've often said to people, I'm a Christian, a conservative, and a Republican in that order, and I think that's how most Americans live. The challenge we have today, I believe, is to have government as good as our people. Government that's as idealistic, government that's as innovative, government that's as creative, but also government that's as respectful to one another as the American people are just about every day. But I think it's about leading by example. And whatever the future holds for us, we'll always aspire to that example. So help me God.
Thank you. You've talked about an issue that's really I'm passionate about, and that's being fiscally prudent. Utah, one of only about 10 states that has a AAA bond rating from all the rating agencies on Wall Street.
That's not the first time you've mentioned that.
Ingrained, it's part of our culture. You ought not to spend more than you take in.
And what's one of the other states?
Indiana.
Thank you.
That's why I like you so much.
That's why I like you.
We've got to get back to some kind of fiscal restraint and not spend more than we take in and have rational debt and save for a rainy day. That's kind of what everybody here in the room does, in their families or in their businesses. What can we do to, in fact, make that a combined effort? I expect that most on the other side of the aisle would say, yeah, we ought to balance our budget. We ought to have. Bill Clinton brags about the last time it was balanced was he was president. What can you do to help that to happen?
Well, you balanced budgets when you were governor. Utah continues to lead on fiscal responsibility. I balanced budgets when I was governor. It just takes, you have to just make decisions. There's great leaders in the legislature in the room. It's about priorities. And I want to concede the fact that other than what we did to get the economy moving and rebuild our military, and other than what we did for families and businesses in the worst pandemic in 100 years, I don't think our administration did everything we needed to do to restrain federal spending. And so first it begins with having leadership at the highest level and leadership in the Congress that will roll their sleeves up and do the hard work. Now, civility plays into part of that. You and I both know that. I mean, you and I often reflect warmly on a couple of Irishmen, one of which was president, one of which was Speaker of the House back in the 1980s. And literally, Tip O'Neill and Ronald Reagan fought like cats publicly, said how wrong each other were on everything. But they sat down, they rolled their sleeves up, they figured it out, and they actually extended the life of Social Security by 30 years through a common sense, compassionate reform, and set our nation back on the longest period of peacetime growth since World War II. So I do believe the civility is part of it. You've got to create conditions where you can talk. But I think at the end of the day, we have to have leadership. I think of what General Mullen, who was chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, said about 10 years ago. He was sitting in a congressional committee and he was asked, what's the greatest threat to the United States in the 21st century? And his answer was the national debt. And that's when the national debt was a third of what it is today. Because the other, when we talk about making the case for fiscal responsibility, providing for the common defense is the first object of the federal government. Today, entitlement spending is 70% of our federal budget, and add interest is even beyond that. And it continues to grow and crowd out the resources that we have to meet our obligations to defend this nation and to stand with our treaty allies around the world. So I think it's all about leadership. I think it's all about you've got to take the case to the American people that we have to have balanced budgets, not just for growth, not just because it's the right thing to do, but because it gives us the ability to defend our nation and support those programs upon which the American people rely.
Thank you. Another issue that's in the press all the time, seems to be a hot button issue, that we can't seem to figure out how to resolve: immigration. And I'm talking about people that come to our country from outside our borders, overstay visas, and we know the challenge we've had at the borders. But the gate never is talked about. We've talked about walls and fences. We don't talk about the gate. We've had this issue since Ronald Reagan, and it doesn't look like to me we're any closer to having a solution we had back in the 80s. So what would you do for immigration reform?
Vote Republican. You can clap for that if you want. I don't think that. Look. We it all begins with border security. I think our administration brought into the public debate a recognition that border security is national security. And so not only the construction of a wall, but a Remain in Mexico agreement that I negotiated on the president's behalf with a Mexican delegation that required people to wait in Mexico while their asylum application was being processed, and literally reduced illegal immigration and asylum abuse by 90%. I mean, we had secured our border, and I tremble when I realize that Title 42, which was another part of our policy, is about to go away under the Biden administration. Literally day one, President Joe Biden ceased construction of the wall, let literally girders of infrastructure rust in the sunshine in Arizona. I've stood next to them. It looks like a freight train as far as you can see of girders laid on top of each other with enormous gaps in the wall. He ended or sought to end the Remain in Mexico policy. Now Title 42 is about to go away. And because of that, 5 million people came into this country illegally in the first 2 years of this administration. It's utterly unsustainable. And so it begins with recognizing that a nation without borders is not a nation. We have to produce national leadership that will accept the responsibility to secure the southern border of the United States of America. That's first. Secondly, my grandfather immigrated to this country from Ireland. 1923. Got off a boat on Ellis Island, took a train to Chicago, Illinois, drove a bus in Chicago, Illinois for 40 years. My first visit to the Oval Office during the Bush administration, I mentioned my grandfather because we were there talking about immigration. And I remember telling President Bush, I said, Richard Michael Cawley getting off that boat on Ellis Island is how Richard Pence got to the Oval Office to meet the President of the United States. That was before I was ever governor or ever held the title that you all gave me the privilege to hold. I mean, this is the land of opportunity, and the truth of the matter is that system that my grandfather came through, that some in this room come through, is truly broken. And I would tell you that I believe the time has come for a merit-based immigration system where we overhaul immigration in this country, we streamline it, we put the interests of our states, our economies, our industries in the country first, and we fix that broken door. You're absolutely right, Gary. I love, again, the 40th president. The reason I became a Republican was because of Ronald Reagan, so I have a great affection and affinity. But he used to say he envisioned a shining city with tall walls but large doors, welcoming anyone who had the courage and the willingness to come here. We got to fix the doors, even at the same time that we're securing the border. But it'll just take leadership to do it. But I believe we'll produce that leadership because I think the American people understand that that this is we're a nation of immigrants. That apart from our Native American brothers and sisters and their progeny, all of our people came from somewhere else.